Welcome back to the bus, everyone. Well, today we're going to try something a little bit different. So, since I intend to use this bus as kind of an overlanding vehicle, a little bit of off-road travel, and definitely some backcountry travel, I want to make sure that I've got as much recovery equipment as I can possibly use. Now, obviously, something this size I can't necessarily get away with just max tracks, but a winch, absolutely, and an air compressor wouldn't be a bad idea. Now, this bus does have air brakes, so I do have an air compressor system installed. However, I'm going to try not to use that for utility purposes just because I don't want to get in the habit of using a vital component for multiple things like that. That said, I do have some leftover equipment from a previous truck that I might be able to put in here. So, here's what we have. Make sure you can see what I'm looking at here. This is an Oasis air compressor. This one was designed for continuous duty, so it does have cooling fans in it, and it should work out pretty well. Granted, this is a sealed compartment I'm planning on putting this in, just to show you where we are. Right there, in front of the tarp, is the driver's window. So this is an underbody box that the bus came with. I'll be putting in one gray water holding tank in the back here across this section. But I've got this spot up in front that doesn't have anything that has to go in it just yet. So anyway, this is a 12-volt compressor. It's basically a York AC compressor converted for air purposes, and it's using the equivalent of an electric winch motor to run it. So it puts out quite a bit of capacity. And then behind it back there, I've got a 5-gallon air tank. So this combination was in my utility truck for a while, but I definitely don't need it there anymore, and I think it'll be better served here. Now, I think I can also use a one-way valve on the output of this tank and run one of the ports into the air brake system. I'm going to run a control switch up to the dash so I can operate this from inside the driver's compartment. But my hope is, if things were to go bad, and if, for instance, I had a failure of the air compressor on the air brake system, I might be able to pressurize the system with this temporarily, just enough to give me some brakes so I can get to a stopping point. Now, obviously, if a line blows or something like that, it won't do me any good either way, but that's the reason I want to put a one-way valve in the output of the tank going into that location. So that way, if something happens on this side, I can't possibly lose pressure in the brakes. So over here, we already have a one-way valve. Let me set this down so I can show you what I'm looking at. So right there above my finger, that's a one-way valve going into the tank. So that way, when the tank is pressurized, it can't backfeed through the compressor and lose pressure in the tank. Up top, as far as what's mounted up here, we have on the right-hand side, this is a pressure safety switch. Pressure safety valve, so it's a pop-off, obviously. This one in the middle is your pressure switch. So I don't have it connected at the moment. I never actually wired this in, but it's up there, and I can certainly wire it in. Over here, we got a pressure gauge. And then down here, we have this little guy. Now, when this is connected like this, then it uses the primary switch on top of the unit here to operate the compressor. However, if I put this in, this is where another switch would go. So if I want to run a line up to the driver's compartment, this switch will allow me to do that. So basically at that point, I then leave this one turned on, and this one operates the compressor. So the plan will be, when I wire this up, this one of these lines will go out through the pressure switch up here, and then back to the switch up in the dash, and then back down to the other side. So that should give me a switch leg that is operated by both the pressure switch and the switch up on the dash. So what I need to do first, I took some measurements, just made sure everything was going to fit in here. There is enough room between the tank and the compressor. There are 4 access ports on the front of the tank here, like this one. So I can access all of those and put fittings in with elbows or T's as necessary to put other things on there. Over on this side, we got a braided line here that goes from the compressor to the one-way valve, right there, just like that. And then over on this side, this one's kind of pointed the wrong direction, but if you can see it back there, right in there is the output from the tank. Then I've got a dryer and filter system that I'll probably run out and attach somewhere up here near the outside, so I can easily just pop this open and gain access to my air when I need to use it. So the majority of the time this compressor is running, the compartment will be open. so I don't feel the need to put in a fan or anything like that up there. My other plan, I want to put this on the engine batteries. Yes, I'm going to have a really big battery bank on the coach side, but I want to make sure that I've got access to this at all times. So if the engine can run, this will too. So what I have here, 2 out of the 3 batteries are already in place here. This is what it had when I got this. So what I can do over here on the right hand side is your cutoff switch. I'm going to take a look behind that and see what I can do for tying into it. I'd like to have this function still as a full cutoff for these batteries. So in other words, I don't want to connect my junction blocks directly to the battery system up in here. I'd like to connect on the other side of the switch. But my plan is to use some conduit. I've got some 1/0 wiring that I can run behind the body panel here all the way across, and then I've got 2 single lug points that I can put up in the back there for power connection. So it should give me more than enough power to run this, and it'll also give me a 12-volt supply right here in this compartment that I can put a fuse block in or something else if there's anything else down underneath that I may need to run off the engine batteries. So let me get the compressor out of here. We need to get the tank marked for mounting, and once it's in place, then I can see about mounting the compressor. Okay, so I got 3 of the bolts in on this one more to go. Basically, I ran out of hardware, so I need to go and get another bolt. But for now, we're solid enough, and it's this corner right here that I need to put in still, so easy enough to get to. Okay, next step, need to mount the compressor. Now I can access these points here after the fact. So I've got a support rib right about here underneath. So I need to make sure that I mount the compressor further out toward the end of the compartment and just make sure everything's going to fit the way I want it to. There we go. Okay. Right about there ought to do it. So I want to make sure that I leave enough room between the end of the motor over here and the wall so I can put some insulation in over there. So that should be pretty good. Here's my tape measure, there we are. Okay, pull this out just a little more. There's enough room there for 1 inch of insulation, but I want some headspace around that. There we go. And I got 2 inches between the wall and the end of the motor. Okay. Next step, where is the end of that support? So from about here, we're at about 9 3/4. So I need to be in front of 9 3/4. So it's got to come out this way about another, man, we're close. Really close. So what I need to find out then, okay, the mounting holes are pretty close to the ends on this, so I might pull this out just a little bit more. I should be able to clear the door no problem, so pull that out just a little bit. Okay, we're 9 1/2, so now I can definitely clear. And here I am inside of all of the latches here, so I should be okay as far as the door is concerned. Alright, so let's measure this and make sure I'm about the same. So we are 3 5/8. Here we are 3 1/2, so I need to push this back just a touch. There, right there. Okay. About right there. Make sure we're still in alignment. 9 1/2, good. 3 1/2. 3 1/2, okay. So we're in position. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of mark this just for my edges, because I've got a mounting plate that's going to go underneath it, so this will give me a pretty good idea. Okay, now, because this is a rubber mat, I'm just going to kind of push that in a little bit. See if I can get that to maybe imprint those holes for me. Okay. Pop that out of there. Well, the imprint's not perfect. In fact, I don't think it did anything. That's alright. Let me go grab the plate. Okay, so this plate is cut exactly to the same size as the mounting plate on the compressor. And I've got 4 bolt holes in here that I know work because I've already had this attached. So, lining this up with the marks that I put down, I can draw out these 4 holes. There we go. Move that out of the way. There are my 4 mounting holes. Now, all I need to make sure, this one has to be closer than 9 3/4, and it's a little over 9, so I am good to go on that. Okay, drill these out and get to mounting. What I'm going to do for wiring, I've got these single terminal posts here in red and black. I'm going to put these here on the floor. I think I might put the ground over here and the hot over here. Just going to bolt them down there. The reason I'm putting them on the floor is I can use 90 degrees to come in through the back there with my conduit. And by putting it down in this location, it makes it a lot easier to put insulation up on that back wall. I could absolutely bring it in through the side wall, see if you can see over there somewhere. But the disadvantage to doing that is then I have to mount it on one of these walls, and I really want to get this in before I have to put in the insulation and whatever kind of sheeting is going to go in front of it. So we'll leave these on the bottom. At some point in the future, I'll probably add a fuse block to this, so I've got access to power for other things in this compartment if necessary. Again, this is going to be connected to the primary driving batteries, so just have to keep an eye on how much I use this with the engine shut down. So at the moment, let's get those bolted down, and then I'll work on how to get the conduit routed. What I'm going to be using for conduit, this is 3/4 inch, I think it's called liquid tight, but it's basically non-metallic conduit. So the cabling I'm using is this size. So this is 1/0 stranded. I've got black and red. So this is way overkill for what I'm planning on using this for. The air compressor here has number 4 cabling on it, and the runs that it comes with are actually long enough to get to the batteries without me doing this, but I just want to make sure that I've got serious overkill. So 1/0 cabling going from the battery to these terminals in here, inside 3/4 conduit. So when you're purchasing conduit, just make sure that whatever you're putting in it fits. I originally bought 1/2 inch conduit thinking it would work, but turns out it wasn't quite large enough. So we'll use this stuff. And what I've got, I bought 2 different types of terminus for this. These are 90 degrees. So my plan is to connect this to the conduit here, and then to run this side here inside a hole back behind where each of those are going to be. So I'll probably go one on each side a little bit, but we'll get those drilled out with a hole saw once I know how big this is. It needs to go through. Then on the other side, since I'm planning on connecting to the cutoff switch, and the terminus for the cutoff switch is on the outside of the battery box, so I don't actually have to go through sheet metal on the other side with the wiring, but I went ahead and got some straight connectors as well. So just to finish off the end a little bit and make sure it's nice and clean. I might even choose to run some silicone in here around the edge to keep things from getting inside, like dirt, insects, that kind of deal. So we'll see how that goes. But for now, I need to figure out where I want these to be. My goal is to put these probably just on each side. So I've already got these bolted down. By rights, I probably shouldn't have done that. If I hadn't, I would be able to drill right behind here. But I think I can't get the drill in there now, so I'll have to go a little bit off to the side. So we'll put one on that side and one on the other side over here. That should put them far enough apart that I can make it work. So let's get a hole saw, figure out what size we're dealing with, and get some holes drilled. Well, if you had an 1 1/8" hole saw, that would be about right for this 3/4 conduit to get the fittings through. I don't. I've got this 1 1/4", so I'm going to use this. Now, if you're having to go a little bit large, what you want to do is take a look at your fastening nut and just make sure that it's larger than the hole saw you're using. So this one is exactly the same size as the outside of the nut, but these outer flanges are big enough to where I think I'm going to be okay. So again, I just don't want to take the time to go into town and get another one, but if you had it, 1 1/8" would be about right. Here we are underneath the bus. So right there you can see the 2 holes where the conduit's going to go through. So my plan, up top here, we've got bundles of plumbing and wiring and things up here, running across. So I'm going to see if I can run across that way. Over here on this side, this is the battery bank. Let's see what we got in here. Got a mud dauber nest. That shouldn't cause any trouble, right? Okay, I have to cut those loose. Right here are my terminals. So if there's room on here, I'd like to connect to these and run them. I'll just run the conduit out along this wiring here, probably up across the top, run it over to this side and connect it with tie wraps, or see if I can run it through these here. There's some extra room in there, so it should be doable. But we'll try running that through, see if I can. So step one, let's get these cut. When you're working with a switch like this, obviously this is for the hot lead, you can tell because we've got red wire up in here. And if you trace it back, it goes to the positive terminal. So over here what we have, this is the load side, this is the power side. I can tell because if I look at this, this is in this piece of strapping here. And if I follow this around, that's this one, that's this one, that goes into the battery bank. Okay? This one here should be our ground going into the batteries. So obviously I'm going to have to connect the ground directly to the battery, which means I'll need to leave a little bit extra on there so I can pull the batteries out when the time comes. But for the positive side, I can connect right over here, and that way when I turn off this switch in the battery housing, it turns everything off. So I can get this piece of conduit cut first, and once I have it cut to size, then I can cut my cabling to go inside of it and get an idea of where this one's going to live. The other one will just need to be a little bit longer. Next steps, this is the piece of conduit that's going to carry the hot lead. So I need to figure out how long I need this. This is the stranded 1/0 that I'm using for hot. If you're going to be doing anything with larger cabling like this, I would say honestly anything from number 4 on up. I would personally recommend getting a set of these crescent cable cutters. These are designed for electrical. They do a nice cross cut, so when you close these down, they push over the top of each other instead of being a pinch cut like a lot of your standard wire cutters are. The nice part about this stuff is, one, it goes right through these thicker cables. The other part is it doesn't smash the end of the cable for you. So especially with stranded stuff, I'll put a link down below where you can get a pair like this. It's really nice piece of equipment. I've used them a lot. So if you're going to be wiring in an inverter or a winch, air compressor like I'm doing here, anything that requires some high amperage control, I would definitely recommend getting a set. we go. Okay. Whenever I do this, I like trying to find cabling that's pretty flexible. This stuff definitely is. You can get some that doesn't have as many strands in it, but the problem with that is when you go to try to use it, it just doesn't flex very well. So if you have to turn corners like I'm going to have to do here, it's just not very effective. Straighten this out a bit. Another thing you can do with this, if you need to, just lubricate it. Put a little bit of cooking oil or WD-40 or something like that in there. Getting close. Not quite. Just gonna fish that in there. Keep it straight. Still not quite there. This is the other benefit to using conduit that's a little bigger than the cabling you're trying to fish through. Gives you some room to work. There, now we're at the end. Okay. Just need to go far enough past that. There's our end. Doesn't necessarily need to be that long, but I'll run it back down a little bit. Generally, I'm going to put a crimp fitting on the end of this and then put some heat shrink on it, and then I can pull it back into the conduit a little bit. So I measured this side out about 5 inches past the end of the conduit. That should give me enough room for my fitting and enough room to get into where I'm going to terminate this. So here's how nice these work. So this is 1/0 cabling. Stranded, sure, right through it. And if you look at the end here, that is still nice and smooth and easy to work with. There's our positive. Let's get the negative, and we'll get to putting some fittings on here. When you're putting terminals on larger cabling, obviously you're not going to be able to use your standard crimp connectors. So you could solder these on. I choose to crimp them on. I know some people don't like that plan, and I know there are several ways to do this. So this is the crimping tool that I got. It's spring-loaded, so you pop this up, you put your fitting down inside here with the cabling inside of it, let this sit down on top of it, and then you have to apply pressure on top of this. Some people like to put this whole assembly in a vise, a bench vise, and just clamp it down. I know there are also some like ratchet type crimp tools that are designed specifically for this. I personally find, if I can find it, that a sledgehammer does a pretty good job on this. It allows me to do this in remote locations, and as long as I've got a solid place to set everything, it tends to work pretty well. So first thing I like to do, you want to make sure that you trim back your insulation far enough to clear the fitting, but not so far that you've got a whole bunch of open wire back here. So I like to just kind of hold the two up next to each other like this and just mark it with my thumb here where I want it. I add a little bit extra, but not a lot, and that usually gives me enough to get a good solid amount of wire inside of this. You can use just a pocket knife, or if you've got a wire stripper or something that'll work on this, that works too. Razor blade, all of that'll do the job. What you want to make sure when you're doing this is that you don't cut the wires underneath. So whatever it takes, just kind of feel for it, and you'll feel when you're getting down near the end. Turn it and go again. Turn and go again. So I'm just going to keep working my way around here. There we go. And one more here, maybe two. There we are. Just kind of work that around to there. Okay, just about like that. Then what I like to do is kind of pull this back a little bit and see how close I got. So I'm not quite there. Pretty close though. I'm going to go a little bit deeper. The reason I'm being so cautious with this is you really don't want to cut the wires inside. If you cut your strands, the problem is you start to decrease the efficiency of your wiring. Now in my case, it's not such a big deal, just because I'm never going to run as much current through this cabling as it's designed to hold. So if I happen to mess up a few of these strands, it's not going to be the end of the world. But if you're working closer to the limits of your material, you really do need to be careful with this and don't cut what's inside. Okay, there we go. Pull that loose. So as you can see, I did damage a few of these strands, so I'm not quite as good as I should be. Again, I'm not as worried about it. Let's try to clean this up a little bit. There we go. Okay, there we are. Now, I'm going to take this, and you want to make sure that you kind of push your strands together so everything makes it down inside. Don't get anything out there, otherwise it's completely worthless to you. There we are. Still missing a few. This is one of the disadvantages to using such finely stranded wire. When you do put it in here, it tends to cause you a little bit of trouble. Okay, got them all. So as you can see, I'm pretty close, right where I want to be there. So let me put this down for a second and go find my hammer. Okay, so got my fitting in here. Got my wiring held in on the other side, just kind of like holding the two together like that. Make sure that I'm centered on this, and let's get her set. Okay. There we go. Pop that loose. And there we are. So we're nice and set in there, and then I've got a piece of shrink tube to put over this. Lock that down, and everything should be nice and tight where I want it to be. We'll do the same thing on the others, and then work on getting everything lined up in the conduit where I want it. Here's something else to keep in mind. If you're going to do a 90-degree fitting like this on the end of your conduit, put it on before you put the terminal on there. It doesn't fit through otherwise. So I had to cut this one off, redo it. No big deal. I had plenty of extra on this ground, so now I know, and I'm glad I figured this out before I dealt with the hot. You can tell how often I run conduit. Most of the time when I run stuff like this, it's all protected, so I don't tend to put this kind of stuff on top of it. Or I'm just using the straight connectors, which aren't as big of a deal. But if you're doing angled ones like this, make sure to put them on first. Something else to keep in mind is the orientation of your conduit and your cabling. So in my case, I want this to sit on the bottom of my outlet stud, my terminal stud. So I want to make sure that when I put this fitting on, this terminal, that I'm doing it this way so it's sitting as low as it possibly can. In fact, now that I think about it, I might take a look and see if I need to flip it over the other way. I just want this sitting as low as possible on the fitting over there, and once that's done, then I should be able to make sure that I can have as much room as possible above it for putting other things on it. So we're getting there. this is a piece of some pretty thick angle iron. I'm going to be cutting off a chunk of this so I can mount the dryer over on the side. So let me get that cut actually. I want to get some paint on here, see if I can actually get this set up. Now, I'm just going to do some final tightening down here. There are 4 bolts holding the compressor on. These are 3/8 bolts. I got 2-inch long, grade 8. And I've got a piece of, I think it's 3/16 plate down underneath. When I mounted this in the truck, I used a piece of like tailgate rubber, or the kind of thing you might find in one of those old rubber truck bed mats. Just something to kind of cut down the vibration a little bit. Here, I chose not to do that, just because there is rubber on the bottom of this already, and I kind of wanted this as solid as I could get it down here, just figuring the bus will probably have more vibration than the pickup truck did. So hopefully we're solid and good to go. Okay. Yeah. Solid enough. It'll vibrate a little bit, but that's okay. I think I'm alright. Okay, let me make sure you can see what I'm seeing. So, this black line you see here, this one goes on the output of the tank, so I can just kind of temporarily mount this for the time being. And we'll see what we can do from there. Yeah. So the benefit to a setup like this, both of these end pieces rotate. So I do have this output on the end of the tank pointed backwards a little bit. I did that in the truck because I was trying to get it lined up, because this black one kind of went up and then came across the back, so I wanted it as far back as I could bank it. Here it's going to come out front, but here too, where is it? There. Here's my other device. So this is my regulator and my output dryer. So I'm going to take this and mount it over here on the side, right about here, just far enough in that I can get it away from the door coming down. So this will be mounted in a slightly different position, but it's alright. I might even cut this this black line down and put some new fittings on it. We'll see. But for now, I'm just going to kind of lock that in there a little bit. Am I lucky enough that this is 9/16? Nope, definitely not. Let's see what else we got around here. And I think I put the rest of my tools in the garage, so I'll have to grab those. Here we are under the bus again. I'm getting ready to connect to the electrical for the compressor. So I've got my lines kind of temporarily placed in here. I still need to put all my tie wraps in place and just make sure that I kind of put things in the places I want them to be. So this is my cutoff switch. I checked before, and this is what comes from the positive on the battery. So this one over here is not the one I want to touch. Over here, this one is the load side. Now I've got this switch turned off, but remember, if you're messing with the hot side of an electrical system, it's always a good idea to take your ground off first. So let me see what I can do just to loosen that up a little bit. Not quite sure what size I'm working with here. Probably 3/4. Yeah, 3/4. Okay, let's see. There, use something a little larger. Little trick when dealing with the wrenches, you can get some extra leverage this way. There we go. Just remember, Don't contact something you don't want to contact. If your ground is disconnected, it won't be an issue. There we go. Okay, and we're loose. Sort of. Okay, good enough for now. So let me get these wires routed and then we'll go from there. So here we are. There's our new connection. So I'll be attaching this up top with some tie wraps just to keep it up out of the way, make sure everything's tied up there. And I've got a screw-in clamp over here that I think I might be able to make use of. We'll see. So for now, we're connected, but we're not hooked up with tie wraps just yet. Then I've got my ground to put in, and I should be able to test this thing. Here are our batteries. So the bus normally has a set of 3. Right now it has just a set of 2. That's what it had when I got it. So I just have to be very careful. The positive terminal back there is covered, so that's good. And this is far enough away from the metal that it's not going to short out on me. But I will be adding a 3rd battery back in here. So this is my ground. You can tell because there's a negative up here. I'm going to move the cables aside. So we're going to take this off and connect this ground wire and conduit to there, just like so. Let's see if I can put you where you can actually see this. Sorry for all the noise. Alright, my goal is to not separate the other stuff if I can avoid it. Okay. Let's give that a try. You know what? Nope, I don't like it. Okay, I'm going to pop this off. For what it's worth. Should be fine. There we go. Pull that up and drop it in place. Just want to make sure we got enough room here. There we go. Okay. Now, push that down. Get those threads to bite. There we are. Okay, one last check to make sure I didn't connect this backwards, which I did not. Alright, so we are hooked up here, we are hooked up inside. Slide this back in there. Okay, so theoretically speaking, actually, before I do that, I do want to tighten these down. So right in here. There we go. By the way, here's the fuse block I'll be putting in. It's going to go up here somewhere at some point. Let's get all this stuff out of the way. I did also get some rubber covers for these terminals. So I'm just going to temporarily connect this just so I can start it and see that it runs. And after that I'll shut the main switch down and we'll put these on. There we go. Okay. It's always a good idea to tighten your clamps and tighten all your bolts before you go connecting things or turning on power, because you don't want to go messing up and making a circuit with your wrench. Or on the other side of things, there we go, the amount of current that can go through these terminals here is dependent on metal contact, so if you don't do a good job with it, then you're going to have decreased output. So the other thing I need to do over here, here's the input to my tank right there. So there's my flare fitting. I'm going to put that on there. And I think, there we go. Okay, there we are. So, theoretically speaking, we should be ready to test this. Let's bring you over here where you can actually see what's going on. So I do not have the pressure switch wired in yet, so I'm just going to have to keep an eye on that gauge back there and make sure that I don't overpressurize this time. But, here we go. Okay, kill switch turned on, and there we go. Okay, there's 80 psi. That's a good start. Set this down if I can. Hopefully it doesn't lose pressure for me. See if I can get you in here where you can see this. Yeah, you're not going to see it much, but that is pointing at 80. Now we're losing pressure a little bit. Okay. Got some loss right here, so I'll need to tighten that up. I think it is just that one, actually. Okay. There we go. Still a little bit of loss in here, but it's a lot better than it was. Okay. So, there we have it. I still need to finish painting my mount, but we'll get this right up on the side here so I can use it. And until then, I've got air in the bus. I'll bring you back when we get to that point, and we'll see if we can't finish this off for good. Here we are back underneath. Let's see if we can get things tied up where they belong. So these two are going through with 90-degree connections, so I need to kind of stand them up there and tie wrap them to this bundle that's above them. Now a large part of this bundle is actually going to be going away, so this will be temporary. But a lot of this is plumbing for the old air conditioning system. I'm not using that anymore, so that will come out. But for now, I'm just going to tie wrap these up to get them out of the way, just in case I need to move the bus. Let's do a little wiring, shall we? Up here on top of the tank, I've got this. This is my pressure switch. So I never actually connected this when it was on the truck, but this time I definitely want to. This will need to go in line on the switch leg, which is actually right down here. So if I disconnect these two from each other and splice this into this upper section, it should give me access to this pressure switch. So at some point in the future, I'm also going to add a line going forward to the driver's seat, so I have an inside switch for this. But for the time being, I just want to tie that in so I can turn this on and forget about it. So let's work on it. Since this is just a switch leg, it's not carrying a lot of power. So I've got this piece of leftover wiring that I'm going to use just to connect between the two. Let's pop this open. And remember, when you're adding a switch to a leg, you don't have to be very specific about which side, the hot or the ground, gets switched. So in this case, if there's power going through here, if this is conducting, then this switch up on top will control the unit. If it's not, then this switch should do nothing. So my goal here, I'm just going to take this, splice it into one of these, just like so. We'll add a little extra wire to it just to make sure. I don't need something quite that tight. And then on the other side, we'll grab the black and splice it in down here as well. When I do this kind of wiring, I like using these crimp connectors with heat shrink. The nice part about this, the crimp makes it really easy to attach. I know some people will tell you you really ought to use soldered equipment. If you can, that's probably a good idea. But these guys, really quick to put on, really easy to carry along, and this makes them pretty watertight after that's locked down where it should be. Also gives you a little extra protection over your connection point. I'm just going to pop a butt splice on here, give me the ability to extend this circuit. There we go. When you're doing this, it's a good idea to twist your wiring before you put your connector on. Gives you a better bite. There we go. I like to kind of tuck that in behind, so let's go about that long, shall we? Just going to cut two pieces about the same length. Again, if I was connecting my switch for up at the driver's side, I would run probably 12 gauge wire for this, but since it's only going this far, I'm not too worried about what I got. Go. When you're dealing with this heat shrink, you can certainly use a heat gun like I've got, but if you're out in the middle of nowhere, a lighter would work fine. Butane torch, pretty much anything you got. So let me finish connecting these and we'll get them hooked up, show you what we got. Let me show you a closer view of what we have here. So there's the wiring up to the pressure switch. Got the two butt splices in place, they're heated up and done. And then down here I'm just connected to the existing harness that was already on the motor. So with this, it should allow me to control with this switch on top. I've got my main power shut off, that's why it's not working. And then the pressure switch should shut it down when it reaches its set point, which I believe is 120. So I'm going to go run it for a little bit and see what happens. There we go. So if you happen to have one of these Oasis pressure switches like I do, they're kind of tall. I think the current ones might have a plastic surround instead of the metal that this one does. These are adjustable. They've got kind of a set distance between kick on and kick off. So from what I can tell, it's about 40 psi difference between the two. But basically you can set your total number by loosening a set screw up here on the side. And once you have that loose, you can actually turn this entire unit. So by turning it counterclockwise, that lowers the pressure setting, and by turning it clockwise, that raises it. Keep in mind that these are set pretty high from the factory, so this one I had to watch it pretty close. It was definitely going above 160, which is where a lot of my equipment is set for. Yes, I've got the safety cutoff over here, this pop-off valve, so it should have been fine, but I wanted to make sure I didn't push that too much. So right now I've got mine set to kick on at about 100 psi, which means it turns off just under 140, like 138, 139. So that combination should be about perfect. Plenty of pressure to reinflate the tires on the bus, also plenty to allow me to use air tools. And I've got this 5-gallon air tank back here, and the compressor can fill it up pretty quickly. So not bad. This is going to work out pretty well. Right now all that's left, I'm waiting on paint to dry, and then I can put my mount up here on the side, right up there, where the dryer and chuck are going to go. I'll show you that, and then we'll be done. And here we are. That holding tank over there will go in the back half of this, and somewhere down here in the middle I think I'm going to put the hydronic heater. But for now, here's the air system. So we've got our Oasis 100% duty cycle compressor mounted right here in front. Got a nice solid mount on here. This is mounted to sheet metal, but I've got a good solid plate down underneath. Back here in the back we got our 5-gallon air tank connected via a flare fitting braided steel line. Up top we've got our pump-off valve, our pressure switch, and a pressure gauge. We got these 4 points up in front here that were originally designed for connecting air suspension to. I might be able to make use of those for other things, we'll see. I might just put some quick disconnects on there. Over here on the side, there's our output. I left it pointed a little bit toward the back of the compartment just because at some point I'll be putting a one-way valve on that and running a line out as a backup connection to the air brakes. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but for me, I'm going to try it and see what happens. Up here on the side, here's our dryer and female chuck right there, ready to go. I've got a regulator on here as well, so if I need to cut the pressure down, I can do so. Well, let me get you back a little bit. Maybe it'll cut the noise down some. Start this up and show you what we got. There's 0 to 140 psi, and we are holding pressure pretty nicely. I'll do some final checks just to make sure everything's nice and tight, but as far as I can tell, we're doing pretty good. So, with that set up, I can now use air tools on this bus. It'll make it a whole lot easier for continuing this project if I want to do so in more remote locations. So I hope you all are enjoying the projects you get yourselves into, and I'll see you over the next horizon.